In Him, all families are blessed. Join our discussion on Fabric of Family.
Well, thank you for joining us for Fabric of Family this week. If you were with us last week, you know that we were visiting with Jim Murrell, who is one of our regular contributors here and has a segment that's called Family Fortunes of Faith. Jim has a very interesting story himself about his life and growing up and a heart condition that he had. And so we hope that you'll stay around for the rest of that interview in today's program.
One of the most tragic events in Ronald Reagan's presidency was the Sunday morning terrorist bombings of the Marine barracks in Beirut. And the survivors of that attack were shipped to a Frankfurt, Germany hospital where they could recover and then get back to war and then go back home a little bit later. And a man by the name of Paul Kelly was over there in that Frankfurt, Germany hospital visiting the survivors of that attack. And he came to the bed of one of the well-respected corporals in the Marines, a man by the name of Jeffrey Lee Nashton. And Jeffrey Lee Nashton didn't have any words to say to the commander. He just simply motioned for a piece of paper and a pen. And so the commander gave him that, and he wrote down two very simple but very profound words. He wrote Semper, S-E-M-P-E-R, Fi, F-I, which is the slogan of the Marines, meaning forever faithful. If you were to open up your New Testaments, you would read about the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul is a classic example of persevering, of enduring until the end. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, beginning in verse 24, Paul talks about that 5 times he was beaten with rods, about 3 times he was shipwrecked, a night and day he spent in the deep, in perils often. In other words, he was in trouble, in perils of the sea, in perils of the air. He was in all kinds of trouble for, not his own gain, but for the cause of Jesus Christ. And later on, at the very end of his life, in his last letter that he ever wrote to his son in the faith, Timothy, he says in verse 7, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And finally, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to those who have loved His appearing. Paul says, I have endured until the end. I have endured until the very end, and because I've done that, there's a reward waiting for me, and I'm ready to go get it. If you were to open up in your Bibles later to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, you would there see what we call the Faith Hall of Fame. People in the Bible that were famous for their faith and that they made a name for themselves because of their faith in God. And in verse 36 of chapter 11, the writer talks about how some of these people, they were sawn in two. He talks about how that they were killed, they were stoned, they were burned at the stake. There were so many things done to these Christians because of their faith in God and because of their unrelentless faith in God, and that they would not give it up for the world. It's very important for us young people to realize that we stand on the shoulders of these men and women that were sawn in two. We stand on the shoulders of the Apostle Paul that was shipwrecked, that was beaten by the Jews, that was scourged, that was beaten with rods, that was in perils of the sea. We stand on their shoulders, and we have the hardest task in the world and the most diligent task in the world to carry on the faith that we have. Paul would write himself in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12. He says, yes, and all those who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus. In other words, if you want to live godly, if you want to live the right kind of life in Jesus Christ, you must suffer persecution. One of the most famous statements in the Marine Corps is that when you get on the boat, if the other men in other ships laugh at how big your anchor is, you know your anchor's big enough. Young people, when other people make fun of us, if you will, when other people say, wow, they're a Christian. And I know they're a Christian because of their faith and because of the way that they're persevering, the way that they are enduring trials in their life, the way that they conduct themselves, the way that they are enduring to the end. I know that I'm a Christian. When people say that about us young people, we know that we are living the right kind of life. We know that we are living godly in Christ Jesus. All those who desire to live godly in Christ will suffer persecution. But we must remember, young people, that even though we must suffer some kind of persecution, that the reward that we have waiting for us can never be matched on this earth. May we endure until our last breath so that we may receive the crown of life.
Well, and you were about how old at this point?
I guess backing up, I must have been 32 or so. I don't do
Okay.
math well, but it was that 2006 date, something of that.
Well, so what did they put you on, a medication? Did they
At that
give
point,
you some kind of heart device? Or
they did all that they could. They sent me home with a 30-day heart monitor. They did intend on me being home for 30 days. They did what they could do.
Yeah.
They wanted to schedule a heart cath, which for most people, heart caths are routine. You know, they're always dangerous,
Yeah.
but they're routine. But for me, they said, we will not begin to touch you because of your anatomy until, as they put it, they simplified it, but they said, we want a plumbing team, an electrical team, and an open heart team in the room before we'll do it. And so because of that, the cath was very difficult to schedule. They first said it would be about 3 months before I could get the cath to get everybody in the room. Of course, with the heart monitor, it wasn't but a matter of weeks or so that passed. I'm in a town about 45 minutes from Philadelphia, doing some visiting in the hospitals, functioning like I wanted to. And my wife calls in a panic, and she said, UAB just called. You're having VTAC, ventricular tachycardia, and they want you there now. And of course, they explained that later. They said that's the rhythm of death. If this is sustained more than a few seconds, you're going to drop, and that's it. They could, you know, shock you back, resuscitate, but that's not going to happen on the street.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I knew then things were really serious. But again, I hadn't had a heart cath yet. They get me over, they push the heart cath, they get it done. You know, I'm supposed to be back for 45 minutes. I'm in there 4.5 hours. The doctors who told my wife, as soon as he's done, you're coming to recovery, that didn't happen. They come in and all they'll tell at that point is, we want to wait till he's awake. And I don't know what that means. But they come in the room then and said, you know, you're bad. There's nothing that we can do. You're going to need a transplant. And we've got to start evaluating you right now for that process. And so that was tougher.
At that point in time, you had never contemplated a transplant, or
It had
was-
been named on that list of these 5 or 6 things that was there.
Yeah.
But, you know, to admit that I was in heart failure, I kind of had skipped. I had taken a stress test, a running treadmill stress test a few weeks before, and bragged with the ladies that morning that they needed to call their husband and tell them they'd be late because I was still going to be running at 4 o'clock that afternoon. After a few minutes, I literally flew off the back of the treadmill. I didn't have it. And I still wasn't ready to admit that, but the cath proved it. My numbers were pitiful. They didn't know what baseline should be, but I was well below it.
Well, you know, and to get on a transplant list, I'm sure there's a process, and there's time involved, and evaluations, and that, you know, certainly a heart transplant is something that wasn't going to just happen necessarily overnight.
Right.
So they had to sustain you in other ways, through medications?
They ended up, medications were some help. I continued to function again. I preached every Sunday, kept doing what I was doing. I ended up in a gospel meeting up around your area. I was in Tuscumbia, Alabama. I preached a Sunday to Friday meeting that week at the Spring Valley Church. And on Friday night, I ended up in the emergency room immediately after services. Of course, nobody there knew it. I took off there because I knew what was happening. And they ended up rushing me from there. They put in a pacemaker / defibrillator at that point that they had already scheduled, but it wasn't happening. And rhythms were so far off, VTAC was there. They had to do it. And so now I'm stacked up against, I've got a defibrillator that's going to protect me a little bit. pacemaker is going to keep my heart in rhythm.
Yeah.
And transplant is inevitable, but there's no time frame on that yet. I'm just being evaluated. So.
Okay, but you did get to a point to where you got bumped up on the list. It was a matter of life and death. You had to have it. I mean, the doctor come to you and basically say, Jim, you know, if you don't get this transplant within this time, you're not going to be here.
Right. I was eventually evaluated 4 times. The first 3, I was so borderline at one point, 2 of my doctors actually argued loudly. After a decision had been made to list me, they argued about listing me or not, because you want to push these things back as far as you can. Technologies get better, medications get better. As far as you can push a transplant, that adds days to the other side, is, you know, supposedly. And so we're pushing it back. By the time I'm finally evaluated for the 4th time, which was actually a number of years later, I had done pretty well, you know, made it. By the time they listed me then, I was put on a 24-hour IV medication. I wore in a fanny pack around my waist. And, you know, that was going to be my new life. Home health coming out. So you're facing that every day. Confined to the home, very blessed though. Moved back to Alabama during that time. Because of that, I had 2 strokes, which are just the rhythm problems, throwing clots, whatever. But we moved back to Alabama. I'm still preaching week in, week out by appointment invitation.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in a situation like that, Jim, would have just been ready to give up on everything, but you didn't. I mean, you continued to the best of your ability to preach, to be a father, husband. You know, what was it that was that driving force there?
There was a driving force. Now, I'll admit there was 1 week right after hearing that initial transplant news, without this you're not going to survive. There was 1 week in there that I went back home and I got in my lazy boy and I sat there for a week. And I don't think it was depression. It was a matter of, I don't want to test this. I don't want to push things too far. I got to be here somehow. Yeah. And then after that week, I pretty much decided, you know what, I don't want to live that life either. You know, my children, my wife, you know.
Yeah. So you had to make a decision to press on regardless.
I did. And, you know, that happened between Sundays.
Yeah.
And so I kept doing that. And I always told everybody, and I meant it, if I have to sleep all week and preach on Sunday, I'm happy.
Yeah.
And my wife said, you know, hey, if you just wake up and talk to me every now and then, I'm good with that too. So that's what I did. It allowed me a lot of extra time to study. That was a blessing. You know, when you sit in a chair most of your days, you can utilize that time, and I was able to do that. But
well, let's move forward in time. May 15th, 2013. That was a important day for you and your family. What happened on that occasion, or what were the circumstances?
It was. I had been on that IV med for 10 months. Had continued to preach. I had been condemned. That's the word we use. Transplant guys condemned to the hospital on May the 2nd. At that point, they said, "You will go home with the transplant, or you won't go home." And that's the day you know you're going to face. They immediately upped my medications. They pulled some tricks out of the hat to try to get me as high on the list as possible. I was at that point, I was listed, but I was a status 1B. I need to be a status 1A. I'd been waiting 250 some odd days, not had any hits, no threats of a transplant. But on May the 15th, they came in that morning fairly early and told me I was NPO, which means no food or drink until further notice. And what that equates for a transplant person is there's a heart potentially out there. So that day was extremely long. I was surrounded by family and friends. I don't know, it was on a Wednesday. I don't know that a preacher in 100 miles, you know, hardly got home in time for services that day. They were there with me, and I appreciate that. But we waited all day. There were 3 men on the floor, 3 people who were potentials that day, similar boats as I was. And at the end of the day, a nurse walks in. We've been told all day, this is working, this is a match. We're just waiting on the doctors, waiting on this. And it's going to happen. The nurse walks in and just simply opens the door and said, "It's not yours." And when she said that, I think I just kind of shrugged it, you know, big deal. But that's not the reaction of everybody else. Everybody else dropped their head and parted ways. I encouraged my wife, children, parents, just go on home. And so I just basically just dealt with that the way I could. I had been doing, I referred to much earlier, the daily dose. I'd been doing that. I let them get out of there within about an hour. I did a daily dose, and that I entitled God's Will, because I knew, you know, somehow that was His will. And I was blessed. The man who got the heart, who was in the same unit I was able to shake his hand on the way to surgery. You know, so that helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, that was a great disappointment, I know, for your family and for you. You know, the excitement and that this day has finally come is here, and then, you know, you get the news. It's not yours. But there was another call that came.
That's right. It was exactly, technically the call came a week later, within a matter of hours. It was right at during worship time at Ironton, so I knew where all my friends and family were. And if they hadn't been there, they had a problem. But they were all at worship, and I got the same word, you're MPO till further notice. It's on May the 22nd, 2013. And we knew there was a potential heart there. By that time, the one had been transplanted, the other had received a ventricular assist device, a VADS device, so he was off the list temporarily. So I was the man in that hospital that was a candidate, and I was matching quickly. They were discovering matches. I texted everybody I knew that might have a phone turned on. Eventually, Cliff Goodwin he first saw the text and showed it to my wife. Of course, thanks be to God, they were at worship, Bible class that time, and of course they shared that news very quickly, had a prayer, and services concluded. My family took off toward UAB to be with me. That went on all night, waiting, still in the back of my mind, wanting to be assured this was it, but saying, if it's not, it's not. You know, I've only waited an extra week. Who knows? And typically a transplant guy, he misses 3-4 hearts, you know, before, if anything comes. And a lot don't survive. So I was thankful to have a chance. And it was about 5 o'clock the next morning. Of course, when they come and give you your first dose of immune suppressants, you know they know something, because they don't give you those until you need them. And they give me that maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. By 5 o'clock, I'm taking the pre-op. And you know things are a go. You still don't know what the future holds, but you know they're a go.
Yeah, and so they went in and did the surgery. I assume it was a good match.
Right.
That surgery took place on, was it?
The 23rd. It was technically on the 23rd, May the 23rd of 13. They took me into pre-op, had me there. It was kind of leaked where the heart was coming from location-wise. And the doctors told me, he said, we're going to take you into surgery. We believe there's going to be a lot of scar tissue. It's going to be a really, really hard surgery. They expected 12 to 14 hours. They tell me they're going to take me into surgery. I asked the doctor point blank. I said, what do you mean you're going to take me in, you know, start? I said, you taking me to the point of no return? He hesitated. He looked at me and said, yes. And so I knew by that my heart was coming out. And I would be laying there at the mercy of a heart coming, what turned out to be from Oklahoma, on a jet to get there successfully and to be a match and to be viable, which is all in the air.
So what goes through your mind, Jim, when you know that your heart's coming out, it's a point of no return, and there's always a possibility that you wouldn't return?
At that point in time, still, I was actually shocked at myself. I wasn't in a panic. Now, everybody around was. I mean, we'd had people, Cliff and Beth, they had come over, several others had come over at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, and been there with us. And so that was great. My wife got to a point, she was standing on the wall and she started to slide down. She was about to pass out. And, you know, so they had to help her a little bit and that kind of thing. But I really did not panic. I had always had a nightmare that I was going to be so afraid. And when they started to roll me to surgery, and UAB is huge. I mean, it's a mile to the operating room, seemingly. Every corner we turned, I thought, I'm fixing to jump off the bed and run away.
Yeah.
I would rather live like I am than chance losing my life in the next few hours. I never did that. When the doors opened, I saw the largest operating room I've ever seen. All the lights, not a moment of panic.
Well, so you have a new heart, Jim. A new outlook on life, I guess, a new prospect of living a full life.
Right. Everything has been absolutely great. I've met my donor family, which is a plus. The match has been extremely nearly perfect. The providence of God. That May the 15th heart wasn't mine. That was the quote. That is true. The May the 23rd heart was obviously mine. I've matched blood type necessary, tissue type necessary, but I've matched down to the individual antibodies and childhood illnesses. So much so they're doing a special study on me now to try to see how this match is so perfect. This man has no relation, no blood kinship. How is this match so perfect? How am I doing so well? I've had no rejection, no infection, no problems. I've been wide open, preaching since that day, and things have been great.
Well, Jim, I mean, obviously you're very active. You're preaching in meetings. You're helping us with this program, doing a segment for us, Family Fortunes of Faith. I mean, you're just very active, very involved, and you're an inspiration to so many people. But there's got to be some things, some lessons that you want to draw out of this situation that would be helpful for those of us who are watching the program today. Things that we can learn from the experience that you've gone through.
Right. I learned to understand several different scriptures. I'll just reference them a little bit. But when the Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians, though the inward man or outward man should perish, the inward man is renewed day by day. I knew what that meant. I understood that. I didn't care so much that my body was failing. I knew what I was getting every day. And then I understood also Paul writing to the Philippians about being in a strait betwixt two, because I was happy to go on. I thought myself to be, faithful and to, been obedient in order to be saved. But at the same time, I just wanted to see my children grow up. I wanted to be with my wife. So that was something I constantly dealt with. But I also learned, and I can't explain this other than someone could read it, but if you go to Isaiah chapter 50, read verses 10 and 11, I learned to not light her on fire. Let God's way work itself out. You can push. I fussed, I fought, I begged, I pleaded, I tried everything to get care, to get healing physically. None of that worked until God worked it out. And when He did, everybody's comment's the same.
And we don't ever know
unbelievable what's occurred.
How that's going to unfold. I mean, in your situation, you probably had some ideas along the way of this would happen, and then it didn't happen.
Never happened. Everything I tried, and it came down to so many other facets aside from my health, insurance things, all of that, financial difficulties, all of that worked out, but it worked out in God's time and by His ways.
I think about Romans 8:28.
That's exactly right.
All things work together for good to them that love God and to them who are called according to His purpose.
That's definitely been my blessing in life. And I would not, I've said this, everybody that's ever talked to me, ask any questions. If I could go back through the same process again, I would do it in a moment. And I would face it the same way, I think, because it really has caused me to be able to grow. And I know any trial can do that.
Yeah.
And it's not that I was perfect through it.
Right.
It's just the fact that after I come out of it, sometimes during, but after I come out especially, I can look back and see all the blessings. I mean, I'm so blessed. The way that I preach, the way that I deliver sermons, the response that I get to God's Word, which is what matters, but because I'm the messenger of it, the spokesman, the response I get is a lot of times so different from what everybody else gets. I can talk to people on different levels, people who are dealing with troubles and facing death in a whole different way. And they tell me that, and I try to use that. I try to take advantage of it.
Well, Jim, one more question I want to ask you, and then our time will be up. But you think about the church, and I know that's so important to you and was important to you through this whole process. Looking back on your own experience, what can the church or Christians do to help someone, a family, an individual who's going through a trial like what you went through, perhaps even a life-threatening trial? What can we do, or what should we not do? What might hurt the situation? Just what are your thoughts about that?
The obvious one is just support those people. A lot of times it is the case that preachers, elders, those people are given a little bit more attention than, for lack of better terms, the typical member. And so sometimes people fall by the wayside. I got a lot of attention because I was able to placed myself through the internet and such in the, I hate to put it this way, but it's what it was, in the spotlight. I was able to access things. I had preached so many places, you know, through the years, 80 plus congregations by that point I'd been in and preached. All those people knew something about me. And so I got attention. Yeah. Not everybody gets that, but everybody needs support. That comes financially sometimes. Mine has and does and did. It comes obviously emotionally, but it comes spiritually. You know, they need to be reminded that God is on their side. And even though they say they know that, actually functioning under that is a lot harder to do. And Christians, churches can do that. Yeah. Just don't turn a blind eye to anybody. And you know, there are people who have had ingrown toenails who have had harder times than I have because they didn't have the church to support them. And if that's their first trial in life, their biggest trial, it's a big deal. You know, death for somebody is a big deal. Heart transplant's a big deal. But having a cold is a big deal if that family or that person hasn't faced that yet and they haven't been able to grow through the process. So always pay attention to what's going on around you and support them every way you can.
Well, Jim, I want to thank you for being on the program today and sharing with us your story. And you are a great inspiration to so many people. And none of us know how long we're going to be here on this earth. You didn't know that as you were going through this process, but I mean, none of us do. But I am so thankful to God that He has given us Jim Murrell for another day. And I don't know how long you'll be here on this earth, but I'm thankful to God that you're here. You're doing a great work. You're an inspiration to others. And we wish you well. And we look forward to hearing many more great things about the work that you're doing, Jim Murrell. Thank you so much.
I'm so blessed. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time that we have for our program today. And my, oh my, what a fascinating and an inspirational story that Jim has shared with us this week as well as last week in the interview. Fabric of Family is brought to you by Churches of Christ in your area. And in fact, there are a number of congregations that support the program on a regular basis. And some of these are going to be scrolling down the screen in just a moment. We hope that you'll take time to visit with a Church of Christ in your area. And I know that any of these supporting congregations would love to have you to come and visit with them at your first opportunity. The program is brought to you by the Jackson Heights Church of Christ in Florence, Alabama. And we have a free Bible correspondence course that we would love to send out to you. In fact, you can take it online, and there's some information there on the screen that will provide you the contact information for doing that. Or if you would prefer, you can certainly take it by mail. And so you'll need to contact us at the Jackson Heights Church of Christ, and we'll get you started on that. Fabric of Family, a program designed to address biblical needs of the family. We hope you'll join us next week.
A love that goes